She wasn't a soldier, not anymore. Just the quiet woman in the corner room of Building 19, the one everyone called Clock Girl. That's what they said when she walked the corridor every morning, toolbox in one hand, coffee in the other, moving like a metronome through the halls of Fort Marin's forgotten annex. They never knew that every second she counted had once saved lives. Not that it mattered to them. To them, she was just Clara Wynne, civilian contractor, calibration specialist, 28 years old, harmless. But when command called an old code no one had heard in decades, the laughter stopped cold. Before we start, if you still believe that duty never really ends, if you believe that some callings just wait in silence, then make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear deserves to be remembered. Clara's days began before dawn. Always had. She liked the quiet before the base woke, when the corridors still hummed low with electricity and the walls breathed that soft, mechanical stillness only military compounds seemed to have. Her workshop was a world apart from the buzz of drills and shouts of cadets outside, rows of brass clocks, antique chronometers, even old pocket watches from officers long buried. She repaired them with the same care she once gave to satellite timing cores, though no one on this side of the fence knew that. Most days, she barely spoke. A polite nod at the mess hall, a small smile when the young techs passed. They'd joke behind her back, guess the clocks won't win themselves, never realizing how close they were to the truth. She had joined the civilian staff 3 years prior, right after leaving a classified engineering division under what the papers called technical redundancy. In truth, the division hadn't been disbanded, it had been buried. The Tactical Integrated Mission Engineering Unit, TME, had vanished from all public records in 2017. Clara had been the youngest member, a synchronization operator trained to calibrate microseconds between orbital systems during live operations. Her codename back then was Operator Timekeeper. But when the mission stopped, so did her title. She was told to resume civilian duties and forget. She did mostly, except for the way she still checked her wristwatch twice before speaking. Except for the way she still flinched whenever a radio clicked on dead air. In the dusty workshop, she surrounded herself with ticking things because they were honest. Machines never pretended. They didn't lie about who they were or what they'd seen. Each clock had a rhythm, a purpose, a voice, just like the people she once worked beside. She kept a photo taped to the underside of her tool cabinet. 5 figures in gray fatigues, faces half-shadowed, the patch on their shoulders reading Obsidian Directive. She didn't talk about them. She didn't have to. The silence was enough. Around her, life went on. Lieutenant Dresden, all confidence and caffeine, strutted through the halls like the base belonged to him. "Morning, Clock Girl," he'd call, flashing that smirk that made the younger recruits laugh. She'd nod politely, pretending not to notice the derision. The colonel's aides whispered about her too, how she spent hours in the vault museum tuning devices that hadn't worked in 40 years, how she ate lunch alone at the same metal table, scribbling notes in a small black book. Probably writing love letters to her clocks. One of them joked once. Clara had smiled then, faintly, and turned a gear between her fingers. "No," she'd said softly, "just keeping them honest." Sometimes, though, when she thought no one was watching, her expression changed, eyes distant, listening for something that wasn't there. She still dreamed in timing codes. She could hear desynced patterns in her sleep, like faint beacons from another world. The brain doesn't forget the sound of a failing signal. The heart doesn't either. The irony was that Fort Marin didn't even need her. Most of the base's equipment had gone digital years ago, leaving the analog clocks in her care purely ceremonial. Relics, someone called them. She didn't disagree. They were relics of a system that trusted precision over pride, of an era where one wrong second could mean lives lost. Sometimes she wondered if she too was a relic. Then she'd shake the thought away and return to her work, winding, adjusting, calibrating, her fingers steady even when her heart was not. One evening, she stayed late. The hum of the bass long faded to silence. The only light came from her desk lamp, casting slow-moving shadows across the room as she peered into the open face of a clock marked Navcom Unit 11. The gears inside were ancient, worn, but the craftsmanship still flawless. Her tools clicked gently against the brass casing. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, tapping like the second hand of a restless watch. She didn't look up until a voice broke the quiet. Still fixing ghosts when? It was Lieutenant Dresden again, half drunk on his own charm, leaning in the doorway. He laughed when she didn't answer. You know these things belong in a museum, right? Nobody uses gears and springs anymore. We've got satellites now. Claire's eyes stayed on her work. Satellites rely on timing. Lieutenant, she said evenly. Everything does. He snorted. You sound like one of those old Cold War manuals. She turned one last screw, the motion precise. Maybe those manuals worked. He didn't know what to do with that. So he left, muttering something about weird clock girls under his breath. When his footsteps faded, Clara exhaled and leaned back. The clock ticked once, then again. Perfect. She allowed herself a small smile. The next morning, the base loudspeakers crackled to life for daily announcements. But something in the tone caught her ear, an almost imperceptible distortion beneath the static. The others didn't notice. To them, it was background noise. To Clara, it was a memory trying to surface. She froze, screwdriver in midair. 3 bursts, 1 pause, 2 more. Obsidian pattern. Her breath caught. That call code hadn't been used since her unit went dark. She reached instinctively for the old radio buried behind her cabinet, a relic she'd never thrown out. The indicator light blinked once, red, then green. Nothing came through but static. Still, she listened. When she finally stepped outside, the sky had turned an odd silver gray, the kind that made everything feel suspended. Soldiers marched past, their voices distant, their laughter hollow. Somewhere deep within the base, an alert tone sounded. A single high-pitched chime that faded as quickly as it came. Clara tilted her head, her pulse quickening. She knew that sound. It was a calibration fail tone, a desync warning. But it was impossible. Those systems had been offline for years. She went back to her workshop and checked her clocks. All of them read 13 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. The second hands trembled, refusing to advance. She tapped one gently. Nothing. Then, for the first time in her life, the entire room fell silent. Not a single tick. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere down the hall, voices shouted, boots pounding against concrete. The power flickered once, twice, then died. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red. Clara stood in the middle of her workshop, surrounded by stillness. Her reflection caught in the glass of 100 frozen faces of time. She could feel it then, that old hum inside her chest, that buried instinct waking up after years of pretending to sleep. She didn't know yet what had triggered it, or who would come looking for answers. But deep down, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Time had just stopped asking permission. And somewhere, someone had remembered her name. The silence didn't last. Within minutes, Fort Marin was a storm of confusion. Power grids blinked in and out, alarms sputtered, and radio channels cut to static. Officers shouted over one another, demanding reports that never came. The digital clocks across the base screens all froze at the same timestamp, 1,400 hours exactly. Even the smart watches on their wrists had gone blank, their second hands twitching as if trapped in the same heartbeat. Clara Wynne stood alone in the workshop, surrounded by unmoving gears, the faint smell of ozone curling through the air. Her reflection flickered in the glass of a wall clock, her expression calm in a world unraveling around her. She knew what was happening. It wasn't a system outage. It was a signal, one she was never supposed to hear again. Down the corridor, Lieutenant Dresden stormed into view, red-faced and barking orders. Power relays fried again. Get engineering on it, he snapped, but the young techs around him looked lost. None of them knew how to reset analog systems. What about the backup servers? One asked. Dead, another muttered. Everything's frozen. Dresden cursed under his breath, turning to Clara as she stepped out of her workshop. You win. You're the one with all the clocks. You see anything weird? Clara met his stare without flinching. Everything's weird, she said softly. But I know what it is. He scoffed. Right? Sure you do. Maybe one of your clocks finally stopped ticking. Before she could answer, the overhead speaker crackled to life. No announcement, no sirens, just a single, low tone. Then a voice. Steady, cold, unmistakably authoritative. Operator Timekeeper, it said. Secure the vault. The corridor froze. Every soldier, every officer, every tech within earshot turned toward the speakers as if the walls themselves had spoken. Dresden frowned. What the hell was that? Who's Operator Timekeeper? Clara's chest tightened. That code name hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Not since the day her division was dissolved and she was told to disappear into civilian life. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she placed her toolbox down gently on the floor and straightened her jacket. That would be me, she said quietly. Dresden blinked, half laughing. You're kidding. She wasn't. The speaker crackled again, this time sharper, urgent. Operator Timekeeper. Confirm and proceed. Authorization Echo Delta 1. The blood drained from Claire's face. That code wasn't just real, it was active. Someone had opened the chain, and there was only one protocol that would trigger it. A classified synchronization breach. Without hesitation, she turned toward the main corridor. Dresden moved to block her. Whoa, where are you going? The vault's restricted. You don't have clearance for that. She looked at him evenly. Apparently, I do. He reached for her arm, but before his hand touched her, a double beep echoed through the hall. The security doors lining the passage hissed and unlocked in sequence, one after another, leading directly toward the lower level. The old synchronization vault that had been sealed for years. The personnel scanners beside each door glowed pale blue, waiting for identification. Dresden hesitated, the hairs on his neck standing on end. What did you do? He whispered. Nothing, Clara said. It did that for me. Without waiting, she walked forward. The scanners recognized her instantly, lights flashing green as each door slid open. By the time she reached the final access point, a small crowd had gathered behind her. Technicians, soldiers, even the base commander now called in to assess the anomaly. This can't be right, the colonel muttered, frowning at his tablet. Her name isn't even in the personnel database. But the door disagreed. The lock disengaged with a heavy click, and as it opened, a low, mechanical hum rolled out from the darkness beyond. Inside, rows of analog timing arrays lined the walls. Massive rotating gyros, magnetic oscillators, and frequency regulators that hadn't run in decades. The air shimmered faintly, like heat mirage over metal. Dust danced in the golden light of emergency lamps. Clara stepped inside, her boots echoing softly. Still alive, she murmured. Still waiting. Dresden and the colonel followed reluctantly, glancing around in disbelief. What is this place? Dresden asked. The vault, Clara said. Backup core for the satellite synchronization net. We built it when digital systems weren't trusted to hold the world together. Every orbit, every defense satellite, every missile relay depends on one thing: perfect time. The colonel's eyes narrowed. You're saying this thing runs the global clock? No, Clara said, crouching beside the nearest array. I'm saying it used to, but something just told it to wake up. She brushed dust from a terminal, her fingers finding the familiar rhythm of long-forgotten keys. The screen flickered to life, green text crawling across the black glass. TDME protocol reactivated, authorization verified. Behind her, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Dresden swallowed. You're not actually going to touch that, are you? Clara didn't answer. Her hands moved with practiced precision, calibrating mechanical relays, realigning gyroscopic cores. The sound of clicking gears filled the vault, each one falling into rhythm, the silence replaced by a growing pulse, like the beating heart of something ancient awakening. Finally, she leaned back, eyes fixed on the central console as its lights steadied into a synchronized pattern. It's not a glitch, she said. Someone called the Timekeeper back online. Why? The colonel asked quietly. Clara looked at him, the faint glow reflecting in her eyes. Because the world's clock is off by 7 seconds, she said. And if it drifts any further, every encrypted system from here to orbit will start eating itself alive. No one spoke. The only sound was the vault's soft, rhythmic ticking, the sound of 1,000 forgotten machines remembering what they were built for. Clara reached for the final switch. Let's get time back on its feet, she whispered. And as she flipped it, the entire base shuddered, not from failure, but from synchronization. The frozen clocks outside began to move again, their hands sweeping forward in perfect unison. The base systems rebooted. Power returned. Radios cleared. For the first time in years, every second across Fort Marin and beyond was aligned. And somewhere far above, in orbit, a signal blinked twice, acknowledging one truth no one could yet understand. Operator Timekeeper was active again. When the lights returned, The base erupted in chaos, then awe. Dozens of screens blinked back to life across the control center, scrolling streams of resynced data that no one there fully understood. Communications officers shouted confirmations, engineers scrambled to verify logs, and in the center of it all stood Clara Wynne, still dusted in brass and oil, her hands steady over the console that no one had touched in decades. The colonel stepped forward, his voice lower now, the arrogance replaced by disbelief. What did you just do?" Clara didn't look up. Her eyes followed the cascading digits on the screen, each one aligning like constellations falling back into orbit. "I stopped the drift," she said simply. "Your systems weren't failing." "Timeless." He blinked, unsure whether to laugh or salute. "That's not possible." Clara turned to him then, and for a brief moment, something ageless flickered behind her calm. "Sir, possible has nothing to do with it. Time doesn't care if you believe in it. It only cares if you're late." Around them, the hum of the vault deepened into a steady rhythm. The old gyroscopes spun faster, their synchronized motion feeding into the restored network. Every clock across the base ticked together, their second hands snapping forward at the exact same instant. What no one in that room realized yet was that beyond the base, miles above the stratosphere, free orbital defense satellites had just reconnected to global command. Their failsafes were seconds from cascading before Claire's manual override reset the entire timing lattice. A world no one in that vault could see had been pulled back from the edge by a woman they'd all dismissed as a hobbyist. Lieutenant Dresden stood frozen near the doorway, the memory of his own mockery now choking him. When the colonel barked for system reports, he stayed quiet, staring at the woman who had just rewritten his understanding of what mattered. Finally, he managed. You were one of them, weren't you? The ones from the old Obsidian directive." Clara smiled faintly, not in pride, but remembrance. "We weren't ghosts," she said. "Just people who knew how to listen." Moments later, a sharp tone pierced the air. The communications line on the far wall illuminated, an encrypted Pentagon channel. The duty officer hesitated, glancing at the colonel, who gave a silent nod. The speaker crackled, and a calm voice filled the vault. "This is General Holbrook, Strategic Command. Confirm identity. Operator Timekeeper, do you copy?" Every head turned. Clara stepped closer, pressing the transmitter key. "Copy, Command," she said softly. "Vault integrity stable. Synchronization complete." A pause. Then the general's tone softened with something rare, respect. "Outstanding work, Operator. Your access was locked under Clearance Alpha since 2018. No one should have been able to initialize those systems except the original architect. We didn't even know you were still active." Clara's hand lowered from the mic. "Neither did I, sir." The line went silent for a long moment, then, "The department will debrief and classify this immediately. But let it be known, your actions just prevented a global cascade. That's all, Operator Timekeeper. Stand down." As the connection ended, the vault fell into a reverent hush. The colonel exhaled slowly, then looked at her differently, no longer through the lens of rank or duty, but through the quiet or reserve for the people history nearly forgets. "When?" he said. "I don't know what to say." Clara wiped the grease from her palms with a cloth, glancing around the room of reawakened machines. "Then don't," she murmured. "Just keep your clocks wound." In the following days, the event was sealed under layers of classified reports. The base logs referred to it only as Incident 1400. Most personnel never learned the truth, only that some unknown failure had been corrected by a civilian technician. But word travels, even through silence. Soldiers began nodding when she passed. Some stopped to ask questions about calibration. Others just watched her a little longer, as if realizing there was more to stillness than they'd understood. Dresden, humbled, brought her coffee one morning and didn't try to joke this time. She just nodded, the corners of her mouth turning up faintly. A week later, maintenance crews reopened the vault to install new security locks. Above the heavy door, a plaque had been fixed in brushed steel. It read, "Operator Timekeeper, guardian of every second." Clara never mentioned it. She didn't need to. She returned to her workshop as before, surrounded by the gentle ticking of clocks that now felt less like ghosts and more like sentinels. Each swing of the pendulum, each flick of the second hand, was a quiet salute to what had been saved, not by force, not by command, but by precision, patience, and purpose. On her workbench sat a single sealed envelope, marked only with the obsidian directive insignia and the date of the incident. She never opened it. Instead, she placed it beneath the oldest clock in the room and whispered, "We're back on time." Outside, the day moved on, soldiers drilling, sirens blaring, the base alive again. But inside that quiet corner of Fort Marin, time itself felt steadier, as if, for once, it too remembered the hands that kept it whole. Because sometimes heroes don't return with fanfare or rank. Sometimes they come back quietly, to fix what the world forgets it depends on. And somewhere deep beneath the ticking and hum, one phrase still echoed through the vault. Faint but eternal. Operator Timekeeper, secure the vault. Only this time, it didn't sound like a command. It sounded like gratitude.